All right. Well, depending on which coast you're on, if you're in the United States, good morning or good afternoon. I'm here right in the middle in Minnesota. So we're just hitting noon right now, and we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Zach Nicklin. I'm from the National Center for Aerospace, the National Center for Autonomous Technologies. I'm also with Northland Community and Technical College out of Thief River Falls, Minnesota. And today we're just going to be giving you a little overview of some of the common flight planning apps, two in particular, Pix4D Capture and Litchi. Lychee, I've heard it said multiple different ways. Frankly, I'm not sure which one's right, but I tend to say Litchi. So yeah, so we'll go ahead and then jump in and get started. So we use a lot of these apps when it comes time to do some automated flights. I know that even folks that are really good on the sticks, if you want to capture specific data and you need a certain overlap, things like that, or you've got a certain flight path that you are planning to use, then automating the process makes things a whole lot easier. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about, like I said, is Pix4D Capture. So in 1 second here, and I will share my screen. You should all be able to see my screen at this point. This is streamed directly from my phone. And for those of you who didn't know, Windows 10 has some built-in functionality for sharing your phone screen up onto your computer. And it's actually nice because we can actually click the button with our mouse and it usually responds to us. So what we got here is Pix4D Capture. This is the opening screen after you log in. It will ask for login credentials. This app is completely free. You just got to sign up for it and download it. One thing that you're going to have to keep in mind is this app has another app that uses that's used kind of as a middleware. So it's CTRL, and then there's a one for DJI and one for the Parrot type series of aircraft. So on our basic screen right here, we see the different mission types. You also can go into a list of your projects, but we're going to start right here on the screen talking about some of the settings that are available. So if we click the setting button that's at the top of the screen, kind of towards the right there, we're going to get our settings in here. So within these, we've got, we can choose our drone. There's many to choose from as long as they're DJI or Parrot. I don't think there's any functionality for any other types of aircraft at this point, but they do have all of your basics, your Phantom 4s, Mavic 2s, Mavic Pros, into the Matrice and even the Inspire series. And then you've got some legacy stuff, the Phantom 3 Pro, Advanced, and Standard. On top of that, you've got your Anafis, Anafi Thermal RGB, Anafi USA, the Bebop 2, and the Bluegrass from Parrot. So depending on which system you're going to be flying with, make sure that you download that correct middleware app. It's that CTRL, and then it's either DJI or Parrot after that. They can all be found in the App Store. All the settings and stuff that I'll be talking about today, I use Android, and so they are a bit variable between iOS and Android, but you should still get a good idea of what's what and kind of how to run through the app there. So selecting an aircraft, I typically use the Matrice, but we'll pick the Inspire 2 today. We'll go into our units, imperial or metric, whichever you prefer. It's all kind of personal preference, or whether or not you're living in the United States. So I default to imperial. This setting right here, the next one down, is sync automatically when mission ends. What this is going to do is it's automatically going to start downloading the photos from the SD card on the aircraft to your mobile device, tablet, whatever it is that you're using to fly. Typically, I do not allow this setting for most instances. Frankly, it's a lot more stuff than I want on my phone. I don't need all the pictures that I'm taking on my phone. And if you are, say, using some type of tablet, things like that, that you've got wireless access and you want to start processing immediately. So if you have a Pix4D cloud account, you can actually send these directly up to the cloud just as soon as your missions. And so in the past, when I was working in that way, we could do it when we were moving in between fields. We would actually have it automatically sync and then be able to send it off to the cloud and begin the processing for the individual fields. So it was nice then. I typically just don't use it anymore. One thing I do use all the time, though, is this enable audio feedback. So I keep that one checked. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you an indicator of what's going on with your aircraft. So for instance, as it's gaining height, ascending or descending, it's going to beep at you, and it'll beep faster and faster depending on how high you're going and how fast it's moving. Another one that I really like is you'll hear the camera shutter sound every time it goes and takes a picture. And that's nice to be able to keep an eye on your aircraft without having to constantly be checking on your device to see that the counter for the amount of memory left is still running. So just gives you a little bit of audio feedback, and it definitely can be nice. I use it all the time. Along with this, save offline maps. Depending on where you're at and what type of signal you get, I do a lot of rural stuff personally because of where we're located out here. And the signal for cell phone is spotty at places. So it's nice to be able to go through, and I can plan these missions from the office using the app. It's really nice just sitting at my desk with my tablet or whatever and being able to plan missions. It'll save that base map behind it. So that way I've got a good visual reference when I'm out there flying. So your base map provider, it defaults to Mapbox. You, depending on whether you're iOS or Android, you may be able to pick other ones or not. So back into the menu here. So we've got multiple different types of missions that we can fly here. And so we'll just kind of move left to right here. The first one is a Polygon Mission. So when you click the Polygon Mission, it starts off with a square here, but you see the little plus signs there. If you take your finger and grab one of the plus signs, just hold it down and then start to move it, it's actually going to make that a point, and then you can start changing the size and shape of your box based on that. So if you got an irregular flight, I know a lot of the farm fields out here are square, some are circular, some I have some interesting shapes around the edges that just isn't worth capturing. So being able to change that is really, really helpful. The Polygon missions I use all the time. Another thing that you could do is if you click inside of the box here, I don't know if it'll let me do it with my mouse, but if you click inside the box, you can actually drag the direction of flight around. And if you look down at the bottom here, this is your estimated flight time. This estimated flight time I have found has been anywhere from accurate to not even close. So I just use it as kind of a guide. It also helps when you have an aircraft that's connected. So in this case, you can see it's all yellow here, and it's got a corresponding warning across the top that it's too large. Frankly, this is because it's not getting information from the aircraft, what type of aircraft it is. And so that's why it's saying that it's too large. A 7-minute flight, you could do with just about a tello there. So once it pulls information on from the aircraft, then it becomes a little bit easier and a little bit more accurate. But conditions really vary, especially based on environmental conditions. So if you've got a lot of wind going on, things like that, these times they're really just an estimate, but they're not terrible. So it helps you plan. Within the Polygon Mission, though, we can do a few things. We can change our map background to go to a satellite view. It's always nice, again, having a visual reference of exactly where you're at. Here you can see we're at our location at the Thief River Falls Airport. This is our Northland Community and Technical College's aerospace campus. Of course, I'm not going to be flying here at all. I'm sitting in an office inside. I'm just going to use the area for the flight planning app demonstrations here. I do like that it does give you an estimated square footage, or it'd be square meters based on your inputs there in the beginning section. Over here, it also gives you an estimated ground sampling distance. This is really nice when you're trying to determine at what height you want to fly. And it's a simple scroll bar. You just scroll with your finger. And as you can see, it should change your flight time. So as your height goes up, we don't need to fly quite as long. And of course, it goes up. I believe this one actually will allow you to go up past 400 feet, but it will throw a warning. It will also use any settings that you've got in the DJI app. So in Go4, if you set your ceiling 400 feet or 399 feet, right around there, it should use that as a default and not allow you to go up over 400 feet, which is pretty important, staying within the FAA guidelines out here. So we can take it if we didn't place it quite right. If we just put our thumb or finger on the arrows here, we can move it around, pick it up and move it around as needed. If we are on the map somewhere and we need to get back to our start, this button right here will get you there. So if we, for instance, come out of here, we go way over here, give it a second to keep up. And then we hit that button down in the corner right here. It's going to bring us back to our GPS point, not necessarily to where we have our flight plan. So if this flight plan was moved off somewhere else, so we'll go ahead and we'll move it down the road here. And then we hit that key. This again brings you right back to the GPS coordinates of your device. So we can't necessarily rely on that to get to wherever our map is or wherever our flight plan is. I found that when I flight plan throughout the day and I'm doing multiple flight plans and I want to move, I just jumped in my car, went down the road to to another farm 5 miles down the road, and I go and try and start a project here. It becomes a little bit of a pain because I can hit this button right here, and this is going to bring me over to where my flight plan is. But as we've already seen, that flight plan is not necessarily where our location is. Here, they're really close together on the map, so it's not that big of a deal. But if you start getting a few miles apart, it becomes a little more difficult. So what you can do is there's this little button right here. And so that button right here, let's zoom in to where we're currently at. And we'll hit that button, and that's going to bring a new flight plan right over to where our GPS point is for our mobile device. So then you don't have to do the whole, zoom out and grab it and move it over like I did initially just to move it over. So really nice, really easy to use. Within the specific mission, there's a settings button. And once we click on that here, we get a few different settings. This is really where I found the biggest difference between iOS and Android. Android gives me an overlap, and it's just a blanket overlap. Whereas on the iOS side, I believe you get a side lap and a front lap, so front to back. So if you maybe need less front to back, more side to side, you can adjust that. I don't know of any instances off the top of my head where you necessarily need that. I think, having a solid overlap in all directions is going to help you when you're building your map anyway. Within this, we can choose our speed. Depending on what type of camera we're equipped with and what aircraft we're using, we may want to adjust that speed. Fast is really nice because you'll see that the faster we go, the shorter our flight time is. And obviously, the slower we go, the longer our flight time. But it also plays a part in the quality of the image that we capture. So as we're flying along, if we have an aircraft with a rolling shutter instead of a mechanical shutter, we might get a little bit of blurriness, things like that, that we need to account for. So we can slow this down if we find that our images are getting blurry, and that will help sharpen them up a little bit. And I believe if you go all the way down, it may even stop to take the individual pictures. But again, that depends on the aircraft and what else you got going on there. So with our angle, right now with the Polygon Mission, it's really looking at kind of a 2D, we'll say map with quotation marks, because obviously if you're not a surveyor, you won't be making maps. But if you're trying to look to make a 2D orthomosaic of an area, then we typically want to have our camera facing straight down at a 90-degree angle. Once we start moving into 3D, we'll see that changes a little bit. And obviously, depending on what exactly you're trying to capture, you may want to mess with that. I typically leave it at 90 here and then 70 with the 3D maps. Lastly is the face, whether we want the aircraft to face forward or towards the center. So facing forward, if you look right here as we go through the flight plan the way it is, if the aircraft is moving this direction, the camera will be facing in that direction. If you've got it down at 90 degrees, obviously that's not as big of a deal. But if you put it to the center, then the aircraft's going to try and have the camera facing center the entire time. Typically, if you're making orthomosaic, that's not what you want. You want it facing forward. When you start doing orbits and things like that, then it makes a lot of sense to be able to have your camera facing center because maybe you're focused on a POI, a point of interest. So, Then you can save your mission in here, name it whatever you want, and it will come to your list of missions. And you can see it right here within this setting. So if we go back to where we started here and we went to our project list, project 3 is the one we were just on there. So what we can do is we can choose the type of base map there. So again, we can throw our satellite image down there. But up in the corner here, we've got a couple of different options here. We can rename our project. If we didn't like the name, if we misspelled it, whatever it was, we can delete our project. And then the last one here, which is really convenient, is load KML. So if we, again, we're sitting at the office getting ready to go out for the day and really want to define our lines, we can actually go onto Google Earth Pro and we can make an outline or basically a KML file of the shape of whatever we want to capture. So if you know that you've got defined areas that you want to capture, you don't want to go too much over that because obviously any extra flying we do takes extra battery, takes extra time, takes even longer to process. So we can actually put an image down from this KML on a map that will allow us to see kind of, where we want to keep the aircraft when we're doing flight planning. So it's a nice little tool to use. Jump back out here. So next is our grid mission. And again, our grid mission is what a lot of us are going to do for 2D orthomosaics. You get much the exact same menu as far as down across the bottom, up across the top, and even over here in our actual settings. It's the exact same as it was for the Polygon mission. There's not really any changes in the defaults, things like that. So it's once you have it set, it's usually pretty good. Of course, always before flying, you want to make sure that you check your settings and make sure they're exactly where you want them to be. One of the things that I found once we make changes here in Pix4D, even if you're just about to fly the mission, so if I've got the aircraft sitting on the ground, powered up, about ready to go, I make a small change to the flight plan. I always save it and it'll take me out of it, but then I can reopen it without too much trouble just by hitting the mission number. I found that if I don't do that, sometimes it will lose settings. It will change settings as far as height, speed, and that just leads to problems there. So I always save it, reopen it, and then just double check my settings to make sure that they've saved. I find doing just a little bit extra on the front end saves me a lot of trouble on the back end, and I'm the type that had to learn it the hard way. So hopefully you don't have to. So you saw when we were in our project page here, again, here's the settings where you can rename, delete, you can load your KML up there. But you see we've got one mission set here, mission 1. So if we've got a larger field, or maybe our initial mission, we set it for the entire field, when our battery runs out, we can call the aircraft back and then we can just simply add another mission onto there. And it makes life a lot easier. So we can see where our last mission was. If we flew this, you'd have little camera points that would show on this map. And so what I'd be able to do is I'd be able to line up the end of those camera points to the beginning of my next mission in order to be able to fly and capture what I needed to capture there initially. So not too difficult to workflow. It's nice, it's easy to use. And again, I can do all of my planning sitting in my office, not out in the heat or in the cold or anything else there. So there's this camera button on the top here. This camera button will actually allow you to see the view from the camera. I don't currently have a drone hooked up, so I'm going to get a black screen by touching this. But it is nice. You can actually monitor what photos are actually being taken as you're flying overhead. I typically keep it on the map view. When you go to start a mission, you should get a box that comes up, and this one's going to yell at me right away. It says, please connect the drone. Obviously, I don't have a drone connected at this point, and since I'm inside, I don't want to go through the process of starting a mission. But once you do connect the drone, you will get another page that pops up, and it'll kind of go through a little checklist for you, which is really, really convenient. It'll let you know whether or not there's an SD card, whether or not the mission was uploaded to the aircraft, any alerts as far as, well, you're starting this mission very far away, things like that. Making sure your switches are in the right place. You want to make sure that your switches into PGPS mode. whenever you're doing this, so that way it's using your GPS for the waypoints. So yeah, it's a nice little checklist that comes up at the end. We're not going to save this one, and we'll kind of move back and we'll talk about our double grid missions. So our double grid missions are just what they say. So when we had a single grid, we were moving in two directions. So basically north to south, doing a what we call a lawnmower type pattern. With a 3D mission or a double grid mission, we are actually going to do that north-south lines, but then we're going to turn around. We're going to do the same thing east to west in a lawnmower pattern. They're going to overlap. This pretty much does everything for you. Once you define your area, it tells you, it tells the aircraft exactly how often it needs to take pictures in order to cover this area. So it makes life really easy. It takes a lot of the guesswork out. We'll be talking about another app a little bit later that is not as convenient with these wide area type projects or the orthomosaic creation type projects, but it's got its own strengths as well. So one of the differences here is the default camera angle. The default camera angle will change to 70% whenever you're working in the double grid. You also lose the ability to face to the center or forward. Again, if you're using this type of map, you're probably not going to want it facing center anyway. So I don't think you're actually losing anything at that point. We do want to be sure of the speed of our aircraft, again, based on the shutter type that we have, and then the angle of our aircraft. So depending on what exactly you're capturing, you may want to change the angle a little bit. One thing to keep in mind, especially as we're creating orthomosaics, we tend to not want to include the sky. So make sure that your angle is enough facing down to where you're not getting the edges of the sky in there. It typically just makes for a better product at the end. But of course, if your workflows and your softwares support, having the sky in there, more power to you. Go ahead and fly in that way. So, again, all the other options within here are exactly the same as the other two that we were looking at. So I'm not going to go through all those again. Next, we have a circular mission, and this is basically your orbit function is what it is. So you define how big of a circle that you want to make, the height of that circle, and it will go through. And once you hit mission start, you can see that there's a start and an end point here. If we were to zoom in, it starts just directly underneath the end when we were zoomed out. But you can rotate this start and end point. So say if you want to enter in from a specific direction, we can change that and change wherever those points might be. So within our settings up here, again, we've got that speed setting, and then we've got the capture angle. Again, it's how low is your camera gimbal gonna face. Depending on what you're doing, you're taking pretty pictures, things like that. Maybe you don't mind some nice sky in there. If you're looking at using it for a modeling type operation where you say you're flying a water tower and you're gonna do 6 or 7 of these at different heights, for an inspection, something like that, then you just want to make sure again that your angle is at an angle that your software supports when it comes to the mapping aspect or the orthomosaic creation. There is a little tutorial help function in there. Getting started, online manual, facts, troubleshooting. There are some really good videos online from Pix4D that really go through all these, and they've got them listed right here, at least some of the basics. But Pix4D has always been pretty robust when it comes to video tutorials that were out there. So that's definitely nice having that available from the manufacturer and right here at your fingertips, assuming you've got the signal to be able to pull up those online features. So when it comes to Pix4D Capture, there's not too much extra there. You can download these images and upload them directly from the cloud. Again, I tend to shy away from that. I just like to pull the SD card, take it home to my computer, and work on it from there. And it's just an easier workflow for me. Yeah, so Pix4D, again, it's got some great functions there. Big one is that I can do all my flight planning. Sitting in my office, I just have to have an internet connection there. I don't have to have one in the field. I can upload KMLs, I can upload base maps or download my base map before I go out and fly if I'm in an area where I don't have good signal. So it's definitely very, very helpful. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about Litchi. Again, Lychee depends on kind of who you're talking to there. Hold up here, take just a second. All right, so here is the Lychee interface. And again, this comes up and it comes up with this welcome every time. Tells you to kind of make sure that that no DJI-based apps are running. So if you're running DJI aircraft or really anyone with a manufactured aircraft and you're using third-party software to communicate with it, unless that third-party software specifically calls out having those other apps open, close them out, because otherwise you can get a little bit of interference. A lot of your settings, though, are going to remain. So specifically, if we talk return to home settings, if your return to home setting in DJI Go is lower than what you've set in Litchi or some of these other apps, it will default to that lower altitude. So make sure you keep that in mind. I typically go through and make sure that I set them roughly the same, or either that or I'm more conservative on the actual app that I'm flying from. So again, main screen from Litchi here. Give you a nice little bit of warnings. Go ahead and we'll close that out and we'll start looking at some of the features here. Litchi, when you open it up, it defaults in FPV mode. So we see the black screen on the background here. If I had a drone connected right now, you would actually see the feed from the camera there. And again, this defaults in first person view mode. So as if you're sitting on the aircraft and flying. We've got the option of return to home or to take off. If I were to hit any of these ones, it should bring up a dialog box that will ask, are you sure? So make sure it's sure to take off. Tells you how far the aircraft will rise, and then it'll kind of hover from there. Up along the top, we got a few different things. We got number of satellites. Again, not having a drone connected, I've got no satellites. It also pulls my battery data from the remote and battery data from the aircraft. This typically tends to be in percentages. So I know that some of us like to monitor actual cell voltage. And so that gets a little bit difficult using apps such as this. But the utility of these apps kind of outweighs any issue in my mind as far as that goes. So we get signal from our transmitter. And then we've got our settings button up here. So we're going to click on the settings button and go into our general settings here. So within our general settings, the first thing we got along the top is it tells us what version of Litchi that we're running. So you can see I'm running a beta version there. Next one down, we've got our units. So imperial, metric, or metric, kilometers per hour or meters per second, depending on what you prefer. If we're imperial, then we're in miles per hour there. So next, you got a map engine choice. I like to use Google Maps, but you do have the option of using Mapbox in there. I don't know if any of the iOS versions have different options as far as these go. And some of the settings within here may change a little bit based on the aircraft that you are connected to. And in this case, we're not connected to one. Map type I've got selected as hybrid. We've got the choice of standard, satellite, terrain, or hybrid. I like hybrid because it actually puts in, the street information that you wouldn't get from just satellite data always. So I keep mine in hybrid. I've never had to change it, never saw a reason to. The auto zoom is a really good function. The auto zoom should automatically adjust your zoom level on your map, in order to keep your aircraft always on that map. So if you do like corridor missions, long linear missions, being able to have that on there is nice. You won't have to be resizing the screen to see where your aircraft is on its mission. It should automatically do that at that point. The map safe area radius, that's a really nice setting. It just shows you, here you can see that I'm set to about a 500-foot radius. So it brings up this red line around my GPS point there from my device. And that's at roughly 500 feet. It does not, my understanding and the way that I've seen in use, is it does not actually provide a geofence for this. This is really just giving you an idea of how far out you've got to hit whatever that is, whatever that distance is that you had specified within the settings. So in my case, at 500 feet, but you can adjust that however far out you want in order to get the results you need. Obviously, depending on the size of your aircraft or what jurisdiction you're flying under, you may not have some of the requirements like VLOS, but here in the U.S. without our waivers, we're flying VLOS. And so if I've got a very small aircraft, I may adjust that just a little bit. So that way I know when I'm getting really close to being far enough away to where it might be a problem, or I might be getting ready to lose VLOS, particularly if I'm working with students, because then it's really, really easy for me to just take a look over their shoulder quick at the screen, see where they are in relation to their home point. And instead of having to guess or find the actual data line that shows distance away, all I got to do is see, is the red line there, and where's the aircraft in relation to that red circle. So it makes life a little bit easier for me as an instructor. The show home orientation, what this will do is that, so as we've got our map here, you see the blue dot with the white outer side, that's my GPS, so that's from my device there. When you connect an aircraft, you'll get a red triangle, and that red triangle would face in the direction that the aircraft heading is, so from the front of the aircraft. Well, turning on that will actually give you a line that runs in between the aircraft and that home point. So if you run into any type of trouble, you can actually use that. So for instance, you lose your video feed, things like that. You can actually use that orientation to turn the aircraft to the correct heading and follow that line back home. So it's basically a set of digital breadcrumbs that you can follow back home to your home points until you get the signal that you're looking for, or to bring the aircraft down. GPS coordinates, some people like them. I don't really find a ton of use for having the coordinates on when it comes to the typical flights. Maybe if I'm doing something more advanced, I might have them on there. Some, they're nice for some people, but I tend not to have it on. The VPS height is your vision positioning system. So of course, not only does your vision positioning system have to be on, but then you have to select this to show the height involved with that. One thing to keep in mind, again, with those vision positioning systems, they do tend to have problems with really shiny floors. So, flying indoor type stuff, but water and flying directly into the sun to where it's right in that visioning position system way. So be careful in instances such as that. I typically keep it off. I use the flight board, and obviously it takes a reading when you're getting ready to launch, and then we'll go ahead and give you your altitude from your launch point. Battery voltage, I always have battery voltage on as far as showing it. That is absolutely critical information for flight, and I don't recommend anybody ever turn that one off. Language is pretty self-explanatory. English, there's a bunch of, there's a bunch of other options in there. I haven't gone through them all. I found English and stopped looking at that point. We've got a couple other little things down at the bottom. You can submit some feedback. You can reset all your settings if you've gone through and you've messed with a bunch of stuff and you just want to start all over again. It's really nice to just hit that reset button instead of going to figure out, all right, what exactly did I mess with and where did I screw up? Sometimes starting with a clean slate is a whole lot easier. Then of course you've got help, and then you've got Find My Aircraft. So Find My Aircraft should bring you to a point on the map where the aircraft was last powered up. And so you can see here, let's see, I was doing some LiDAR ditch work there, and you can see that's my last landing point. That also shows you the little arrow that I talked about earlier that shows the heading of your aircraft. So the point of the arrow is always at the face of your aircraft, the front of your aircraft. So that's, again, you can use it to see orientation a little bit. All right, so we'll go into the next one. The next one is our camera settings. So camera settings, again, may change slightly depending on what you have hooked up, but these are some of the general ones. Auto record. I know more than once I put an aircraft up in the air and forgot to hit that button. So this actually makes it easier for you. It's auto record. As soon as you take off, the recording will start. It's a whole lot easier to cut a little piece off the beginning as the aircraft's ascending than it is to refly an entire flight because you forgot to push that button. So if you're doing anything, cinematic things like that, where you're using, stills from motion that type of thing. Having that auto record on is going to be very, very helpful. Overexposure warning. Again, this is just going to tell you when things are bright. And so it will give you a little warning there. Anti-flicker, same type of thing. When dealing with like fluorescent lights have a tendency to flicker. And so what that's supposed to do is it's supposed to time the camera shots in a way that the flicker becomes minimized. So it's supposed to be helpful. I don't really fly around a lot of fluorescent lights, so I'm not sure as far as you know, how helpful it is if there was an actual problem with the flicker. Your histogram just shows those different light levels. Anybody who's learned anything about cameras should have an idea about the histogram and what it does. I'm not going to go deep into it here, but we can turn it off and on. We can also turn off and on grid lines. So again, when you're taking pictures, you know, you got the rule of thirds, things like that. So you can actually bring up your grid lines on here, and it does have two options, plus. So you got the disabled, you got the grid, and the grid just brings up a basic grid. You can kind of see it here from my camera view. We got the 9 panes, very, very common in the photography side of the house. But the other one that we have there is the grid plus diagonals. And that's just going to give you the diagonal lines across, again, that meet in the center there. So I typically don't use the diagonals. I do use the grids whenever I'm doing any photography type stuff, just to help me set up shots, things like that. And it just becomes a little bit easier. So all right, so we can format the SD card. Very important, typically formatting an SD card, especially within the aircraft, it tends to go a little bit better. You know, making sure that that every once in a while you do format your SD cards. Don't let your SD cards turn into a digital junk pile. Make sure that you're you know, doing proper data management practices, really, and that includes formatting these SD cards every once in a while. And then, of course, you got the blanket reset camera settings. So over here in the general, we can read all the settings. In the camera side of the house, we can reset specifically the camera settings. Under aircraft, again, we've got our go home altitude and our maximum altitude. So those of you familiar with DJI products, or those with a automatic return to home and RTH, you know, you hit a button and it typically will do a couple of different maneuvers depending on what you're looking for. Typically, if our go home altitude is set for higher than where our aircraft is, the aircraft will ascend. It will go to that specific altitude. It will transition to its home point and then descend from there. If we are higher than our go home altitude, again, depending on your aircraft, it should descend to that altitude, move home, and then descend all the way. The maximum altitude here is, you know, it will not go above this altitude. It's basically an altitude type of a geofence. But please remember, especially with the DJI aircraft, that if these are too different from what you have set under DJI, you may have to do some tweaking and they may not work correctly. So it's a good idea just to make sure that that they're set the same. So typically what I'll do is I'll go through at the beginning of a week that I know I'm going to do a lot of flights, and I'll just go through and check my aircraft in DJI Go4, make sure that all my settings are where I want them to be. And I typically use a set of settings. I've got kind of a little worksheet that I use for each aircraft. And so I can just go through and I know what all my defaults should be based on my operations. And then I go through in here and I compare them. So the dynamic home point is actually a really nice function. So typically when you power on your aircraft, you know, you get a message that home point set, and that's based on where your aircraft is sitting. The dynamic home point will allow the home point to move with you. So if you're doing operations from a moving boat, for instance, having a dynamic home point could be very, very helpful for you. Logging flights, I always recommend keep your flight logs on. Worst comes to worst, and you know, something happens, you've got the information that you can send in to the manufacturer themselves. Even if you never look at it again and nothing bad ever happens, it's just great to have a little more data than you need rather than not having the data when you do need it. So, and one of the things that Litchi supports is a direct upload to air data. So plenty of folks use air data to keep flight logs, things like that. Syncing information with air data, so you've got it already built into a log for you. It's really nice. So you can actually put in your air data user token here, and it'll go ahead and set it up so it can sync with you with your online account. And then you've got the ability to manually sync at any time by hitting that sync with air data UAV now. We've got the ability to calibrate our compass. This one's actually really nice. I like it better than DJI's. DJI brings you up a screen, and you've got to actually look at the screen and then follow its instructions there. Typically that wouldn't be too bad for me. I operate a lot from the back of my truck. All right, so I'll throw it on the bed of the truck and I'll use that kind of as my work table. But you don't want to power up your aircraft right next to a large hunk of metal because then you're going to be calibrating your compass quite often. So what I typically have to do is I've got the remote controller along with my tablet or mobile device sitting on the bed of my truck. And then I'll go out and 10, 15 feet away, set the aircraft down, power it up. But then if we get an error that the compass needs to be calibrated, I've got to walk back and forth because I don't memorize the screen or the steps for calibrating the compass. I just haven't found the need to and don't like to memorize things like that that have specific steps just to make sure that you get it all right. Making sure that your compass is calibrated correctly is very important depending on the environment that you're working in, especially. So Litchi here, it actually will give you audible commands. So you don't have to walk back and forth, in my case, between the truck and the mobile device to be able to do the calibration. And I know I could just pick up the remote and the mobile device and go set it on the side of the road so where I can see it. But for some reason, I don't like to do that. So I'd probably step on it is what happens. The maximum location accuracy here, this is typically used in the follow mode. And, honestly, I haven't messed with it too much. I found that keeping it at its defaults, it works. And I don't use follow very often. I use it very rarely. I've tested it out a half dozen times. But depending on your phone and the accuracy built into that phone, that mobile device, if you're having any issues starting a follow mode or continuing in a follow mode, it could be because of your location accuracy. So you may have to play with that a little bit. And my understanding is typically folks who have to play with it have to raise it up a little bit in order for it to work. So maybe your location accuracy on your device is not that good. So bring it up a little bit until it works, and then when it works, you can go on and continue with that ability in the follow mode. The gimbal mode, there's a couple different gimbal modes we have here. So you've got free, much like the Inspire, the 360 spin, nothing's in the way. You've got FPV, that's your first person view. It's kind of locked in the front. And then you've got your yaw follow. So it may, if you are looking at something specific and the aircraft yaws, it should still follow whatever you're specifically looking at. You're just moving the aircraft. So I typically keep mine in free for most of what I do. I don't do FPV flying too often. Gimbal gesture control, that's really nice and easy. So on some of the other apps, and actually you can see this on the DJI app, if you hold your finger down on the view screen from the feed from the camera, you can move it up and down, your finger up and down, drag it, and it will have the aircraft camera follow that gesture. So legacy panel mode, frankly, I'm not sure what that's for. I have never used it before. Barely even knew it existed. So on to the next one, speech. So the speech here is really great, depending on what you're trying to do. It's really great, especially if you have students and multiple students that are out there flying and you're kind of responsible for what's going on with them. Not when you're acting as an RPIC, obviously, because you can only act as the pilot in command for one aircraft at a time. But having just an audible signal of what's going on with the drones around you is very helpful. So enabling speech, it's on toggle switch. Nothing crazy there. The feedback frequency here, default is 20 seconds. Frankly, that's too much for me, especially if you use the feedback right here. So the feedback right here, these next four, is your altitude, distance from takeoff point, your speed, and your battery. I like to have the battery on there, but I'll do it for about every minute or so. So I'll change the default to about 60 seconds. Altitude feedback. Typically, I'm in a waypoint type mission, so I've got a really good idea of what my altitude is based on my settings within that. So I like to keep that off. The distance feedback, again, if I'm in a waypoint mission, I don't necessarily need that. Maybe if you're flying FPV or certain other things, you might want that. And then the same with the speed of the aircraft. Again, with a waypoint, you set the speed within the settings, and we'll go through that here after this. But if you're flying FPV, if you're hand flying, it's sometimes nice to get some of that feedback. 20 seconds, again, is too much for me. Every 20 seconds, it'll tell you your altitude, your distance, your speed, and your battery if you've got all 4 of those on. And frankly, it just gets a little annoying to me. So I tend not to use those. I do keep speech on, and I keep them on for warnings. So on here, again, you got warnings. You can change the frequency. Defaults to about 60 seconds. And then looking below is the 2 warnings that it's really talking about the most. Is warn when the battery drops below 25%. That's where it defaults. I keep it about there. I like to know when I'm about 25% because I tend to land between 15 and 20%, just for peace of mind for myself. And then warn if the satellite count drops below 6. So if you've got 6 satellites, it's not going to give you that warning. If you drop down to 5, it will start giving you that warning, and then it'll repeat that warning every 60 seconds until that warning clears. So something to keep in mind. It's a nice little tool, and again, audible alerts are nice, especially if you're keeping an eye on your aircraft and what it's doing, the airspace around it, being able to know that your battery warnings and satellite warnings will come up in an audible manner, so you don't have to necessarily be staring at the screen is very helpful. Our last tab here is keys. So the keys tab really refers to those keys kind of on the back of your remote, the finger ones. There's a C1 and C2. And if you see, each of these is based on the mode that you're in. So I can basically reset the defaults of those buttons and what they do right here on the screen based on the mode that I'm in. So if I'm flying FPV and I hit C1 on the left there, it'll reset the gimbal. If I hit C2, I can switch between map and video. I can go in these, and it gives you a few different options on them. I'm not going to go over all of them, but it does allow you to customize this. And I want to say it's mostly the most common requested items likely that Litchi got. One thing that I do like is turning off the front LEDs, especially if you're trying to get some night shots. Now, of course, you still want some type of lighting to be visible, free statute miles, other aircraft can see you. But it's nice if you disable those front LEDs if you're doing pictures at twilight, things like that, because then you're not getting that extra light facing on the camera lens from those from the front of those legs, because they tend to be mounted underneath the leg and shining downward, which is of course where your gimbal is. So something to keep in mind. Again, you can change it based on the individual modes that you're flying in here. So let's talk about some of those modes. Again, we talked about FPV mode. That's our default, always comes up in that. There's not a ton to it. You can change your camera settings, whether you are taking pictures, whether you are recording video, and then go into here and you've got the settings for your camera itself. Again, your aircraft's got to be connected in order to get to the camera settings. There is a VR mode and there is a share within this. So you get that little share button in the corner here. And if you hook it up to your Facebook, you can actually do it live from the aircraft itself. Some people really like that feature. I tend not to myself, and then there is a VR mode. But again, your aircraft's got to be connected to VR mode. So let's talk about some of the other flight modes. We've got Waypoint. Waypoint's really, really nice. I can just tap the screen and it will start putting up waypoints for me. And then I can go in and I can edit these waypoints. So if I tap on waypoint 1 here, it's going to give me the settings for waypoint 1. Right along the top, I can delete it, or I can add another waypoint within here. The X just closes out the window. I can choose my altitude. Now this altitude is based on takeoff point when you do it this way. All right, so we go 98 feet from the takeoff point. We can use the slider to go back and forth. Sometimes it's easier to just use the plus or minus, again, depending on what you're doing and what your operations are. Speed. So you can set a cruise speed within the settings over here, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But if we drop this speed all the way down, it will automatically use the cruising speed that's set over here in these settings, okay? Or we can modify that based on what we want. Maybe we'll go faster between 2 waypoints. Maybe we want to go slower between 2 waypoints. All depends on what the goal of your mission is. We've got curve size. So right now I'm set at straight lines, and you can kind of see that in there. If you see in between my corner that I made with 2 here, there's no extra line there. The aircraft is going to come all the way to this waypoint, stop, turn, and go to the next one. And it's going to do that in all the corners in the way we're set up here. If we were to go into the settings here, we can change that to a curve, and I'll kind of show that a little bit here in a second. You can choose your gimbal pitch. So if you want to have the gimbal focused on a point of interest, or to use the interpolate function. The interpolate function, keep in mind that you've got to have the waypoint before and the waypoint after where you want to interpolate, also set to interpolate. And I believe the settings in the main must match up as well too. But what this allows you to do is it allows you to change the gimbal pitch. So for instance, if I was flying between these 2 points here, and I wanted the aircraft to go from, say, 90 degrees, the gimbal to go from 90 degrees up to 10 degrees, I can make those settings using that interpolate. And it just makes for a really smooth gimbal transition. No fits and starts that you'll get sometimes using the wheel on the side of the controller if your controller is equipped. You know, sometimes we go a little too far and we have to go back down, and then you got to edit that out. And so it becomes a little bit of a pain. But using that interpolate function will absolutely make it really, really smooth, which is super helpful. Here, I managed to get myself to 920 feet. Photo capture interval with Litchi. Again, Litchi is not the same as Pix4D. If I wanted an area covered for an ortho mosaic, I probably wouldn't use Litchi without having to do a whole lot more of initial setup. But you can choose that if you're going down a flight path and you didn't want video, you just wanted stills, to take a picture every X amount of seconds, or you can choose feet. So every so many feet that it flies in whatever direction, it will take another photo. So if, for instance, you build a facade mission, you've got a large high-rise that you want to do an inspection top to bottom, and you want to do lines up and down the facade of that, you would choose your speed of the flight of the aircraft along with the picture capture interval to match that speed and the abilities of your cameras. You can set some actions in here. So what it does at the individual waypoint, you can tell it to stay for however many seconds. So it goes and sits at a waypoint for 6 seconds, whatever it is. You can tell it to take a photo. So it will get to that waypoint in the direction that it's supposed to be facing, take the photo. For waypoint 1, it's really nice. You can have it automatically start recording. It goes back to, hey, did you remember to hit that record button? And if you're the type that doesn't, it's really, really helpful to have it just automatically start recording as soon as it hits point 1. You can have it rotate the aircraft, tilt the camera, or zoom, again, assuming that your aircraft is equipped to be able to do stuff like that. Then we can use these arrows down at the bottom here, and we can just move between our different waypoints and change our settings based on what we need. Going into the main mission settings, we can see our heading mode. Our heading mode, we've got toward the next waypoint, your initial direction, so which way were you facing when you were taking off, user controlled or defined by the waypoint. I typically, for my operations, it's toward next waypoint. If I'm going to that next waypoint, there's something over there that I want to capture, and so that's what I typically do. The finished action, so in this case right here, you can see that the mission that I have set, you know, it doesn't meet back up at the end. You know, I can square off the box here and have the aircraft just hover when it gets back over here. But I've got other options if I have to use them here with this finish action. So I can tell it to go home. I can tell it to land. Keep in mind, land should land it exactly where it's at the end of the mission. All right, so maybe keep that in mind and make sure that that area is clear and safe for landing before selecting that one. You can tell it to go back to the first waypoint, so it'll automatically come back to waypoint 1, but that's assuming that you're there at waypoint 1. You know, we don't always start a mission exactly where we're standing or where we want the aircraft to land from. So it's another way that we can choose, you know, where it goes to. And then last, reverse. In reverse, it should fly that mission in reverse and come back to waypoint 1 there. I typically have the finish action as go home because I'll design the flight to capture the things that I need. So the path mode, again, I talked about this a little bit. We got straight lines. So it's going to go from waypoint 1 here over to waypoint 2, stop, turn in place, and head to waypoint 3. If I didn't want that stop and that hard turn, so if you're starting to look like more cinematic, so you want those nice smooth turns, with our LiDAR, we use curved turns. And really, it just smooths out that turn. So you can see that blue line there. It's never actually going to hit waypoint 2. So we got to be careful with that. If you have an action set for waypoint 2, it may not actually perform that action if you've got these curved turns on, because the aircraft will never actually officially reach waypoint 2. So I know I had some issues with that early on with Litchi. I haven't had too many recently, but then again, I've not been doing the actions as often. Typically, I'm doing a corridor mapping type project, so I haven't messed with that one in a little while. So something to keep in mind, that if you do have curved turns, you may not hit the waypoint, and therefore, if you've got an action set, it may not do that action. Our cruising speed. So if we remember back into our waypoints, our setting for the individual waypoints, if we move this all the way to the back, it told us that use the cruising speed. So that's this speed right here. It's really nice. So, I mean, if I've got a complicated mission where I've got to speed up and slow down all over the place, you know, that's one thing, and I can see setting them individually. But for what I do typically, I don't want to set the speed individually at all my waypoints. I've got 40 waypoints. I don't want to go through that. So I'll simply set my cruising speed. And then in my waypoint, I can just go ahead and bring it all the way down, and it'll say use cruising speed. So that makes it very helpful. Your max flight speed, I usually crank it up somewhere on the max of the aircraft, specifically if I'm doing corridor type stuff. That way it just returns home quicker and I can pack up and move on to my next site. So, all right, wow, we're already moving to the top of the hour. This is, all right. So the follow mode. So you can see when it's just follow mode, we've got these two options right here. So if we were to just hold down on the screen here or tap a place on the screen here, we should be able to drop there we go. All right, so here we've got our follow settings. So within here, we can set from the aircraft position, we can choose our altitude, our distance, and have this go ahead and start following if you hit start. We've got our heading mode. In this case, you can do the course or north. So you keep the aircraft facing north, or you have it turned to keep the course that it's on. In here with the heading and leash, let's see right there. There you go. So it's a little hard to see on the screen there, but let's see if we turn, yeah. You can see it a little better now. So with the leash here, that just means it's walking behind you, or the aircraft is staying behind you. And so when you choose these distances and the altitude, that's the altitude the aircraft's going to be, and the distance behind you it's going to be if it's on this leash. You can change it over to lead. You can change it off to the left, off to the right, and I believe you can even choose some of the in-betweens there, depending on the type of shot you want. Again, if you're doing follow me, you're typically doing, you know, adventure stuff, or at least having a little fun trying to run away from your drone and seeing if it'll follow you. So depending on the environment you're in or the type of shot you want, you may want that aircraft following you from a different position. So that's very, very helpful. Gimbal Control Auto, I think if you're doing follow me, typically you're not really messing with the controller too much. So I keep that on auto. This tight, that just really helps it kind of focus in a little bit. So, you know, if somebody is 4 feet tall versus 6 feet tall, really that's not a huge difference, but there is a difference there as far as where the camera's aimed. And then you can offset from the subject as well by degrees. So you can change that based on what you need. Your altitude reference in this case is the power on elevation. So the elevation that came up when you powered on will be 0, and you move up from there. You can actually disable your RSD joysticks, and this is really a good idea. So if you're using Follow Me, again, you're typically not hand flying at the time. So disabling your joysticks a little bit can be very, very helpful. So that way you don't accidentally command it to do something you don't want it to do. You can enable whether or not your aircraft to do horizontal movements, and then you can go ahead and start the mission from there. Orbit mode is much like the orbit that we talked about with Pix4D. We can tap a place on the screen here. It feels like it. There we go. It's going to point up a point of interest. And so that point of interest is going to determine exactly how we go about doing this orbit. So again, we can use a slider bar. We can set our altitude. We can also use the plus and minus. The radius of your orbit. So doing tower type inspections, things like that. It's really nice to just be able to do this. You get a nice smooth orbit around whatever object that you're looking at. You can choose the speed. So, I mean, you can go all the way down to, 0.1 degrees for a minute, and it tells you right there. It's 60 minutes for a revolution at 0.4 miles an hour. Or you can speed it way up, and you could do the same one revolution in about 1 second. So all depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Your entry point is, where does the aircraft come into the circle to start this circle? So you can nearest would be, if I've got my aircraft off over here where I am, it's going to fly straight over here, get into there, and start its movement around the circle from there. So, but maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want to come in from a specific direction. So we've got, north, south, west, east, and then nearest as our options. So if I were to choose, in this case, west, then my entrance would be over here, and you can, well, it actually doesn't show anything for that, but the heading mode. So there's 3 that we've got here, and you use them for different things. And the first thing that comes to mind, again, is like tower inspections. When we're talking about cell phone towers, a lot of the times they ask for, hey, what does the view look like from there? And they're not looking for a pretty picture. What they're looking for is obstructions, or being able to show potential clients that there are no obstructions out in this area. And we've got this great, field of view for whatever antennas you put up there. So in that case, you can use outwards. You can go, and this will actually do that same tower. If we got a tower in the middle here, and the aircraft would face outwards the entire way around, you could show exactly what's out there around that tower. The other side of that is we do center, and it faces in towards the center at that POI. So now we're taking pictures of whatever is right here at this point that we put there. You can choose your direction, whether we're clockwise or counterclockwise. Gimbal control, you can either have it on manual, or you can, actually, you can't auto this one, can you? Yes, you can. Okay. Manual or auto. Again, depending on what you're doing. For instance, again, we're going to use the tower because that's the easiest one in this one. So say we're looking at a water tower. Whenever you pull up a water tower on Google Earth or any of these map engines that use Google Earth in the background, typically it's not straight up and down shot. There's a slight angle to it. So when we go and we put this out there, on the map, it could be in a way that maybe the top of the tower is not centered in your frame, or the bottom of the tower, whichever it is that you're looking for. So being able to have manual control of that gimbal allows you just to make those little adjustments on the fly to really keep whatever you want to look at there in the front of your screen. And again, typically when I use it on tall structures, because that's where I come up with the problem there. So I do see we got a couple of Q&As and some things in the chat. I will absolutely get to them. I'm going to try and move through this just a little bit quicker, so we can leave about 20 minutes at the end here for any Q&A. All right, so the focus and the pano and the track modes, again, it's not something that I typically use, but where are we focusing at? We can do point of entrance or mobile device. Again, we can give it its height. And this is focus, not like focus your camera in the camera settings. It's where's our field of view focus. So it should keep this, whatever our point of interest is, kind of in the center of the frame. So for instance, if I were to have a point of interest right here, and I was moving from over here in this direction, it should automatically move my gimbal to keep that in that same frame of reference. So as I move over the top of it, the gimbal should be facing straight down. And then if I've got something like an Inspire that allows, 360 rotation, after I move across the top of it, it should start swinging back up the other way. Aircraft rotation, again, if I'm using this, I'm going to keep it on auto. It's up to you guys how you do business. The joystick reference is an important one. So you can use the device orientation of your mobile device. And so if we were to use this one, let's see if it'll actually do it here. Not showing it right now, but so what it will actually do is it will actually give you an orientation based on your mobile device. So when you start to rotate the joysticks, it's all going to be basically focused on the direction you're facing rather than the direction that the aircraft is facing. So if you think about something like headless mode, kind of similar, that it's all about your orientation and not the aircraft's orientation. Joystick speed limiter is just that. If you were to crank it all the way, say forward for fast forward flight, you can limit it to where it will only go to 75% or less or more of what your full flight is. So say your aircraft's top speed is 20 miles an hour, and that's where we got everything set. If I go down to 75% and I were to put the stick all the way to its stop, I would only go to 75% of that 20 miles an hour. So, I'd top out at 15 miles an hour in that case. Pano is pretty self-explanatory. You're doing a panorama, and there are panorama settings in there. You can choose the width, how many columns and how many rows. Typically, when you do panoramas, obviously you're doing multiple camera shots. And so if you think about much like how we project the Earth onto a flat piece of paper, if we were to grid that out and put it in a circle around us, that would show us the grids for each field of view. And so we've got columns and we've got rows. So the rows side to side, columns up and down. And depending on what you want to capture in your panorama, is it a 360 panorama? And what type of height do we want? Do we want all the way down to the ground? Or do we want to focus more up in the air? Things like that. We can choose the number of columns that we use. So again, you'll get a greater overlap. We can choose the number of rows, and both of these will change if you look the amount of photos that it's going to take. Obviously, more photos, you're going to have more information in there, but processing becomes more of I won't say necessarily a problem, but takes longer. Natives, do you want any pictures of the camera facing straight down? That's what that's talking about. And how many do you want? So you can change that based on what you want. You can change your grid pattern. You can change your capture strategy. Capture strategy might depend on the environmental conditions around you. Do you want to go column by column? So it'll go to a column, go to the next one, or do you want to do it row by row, where it'll do 360s with the camera facing up this way, another 360 with it facing about straight, another one down. Again, depends on the number of rows and columns that you have, but your capture strategy may change based on what you're looking for. Do you need a delay before or after each photo? So some SD cards are not to the same standard as others. So if you've got one that doesn't write quite as well, then maybe you want to add in a delay there, so that way it can for sure process it and take the next photo. And then track is just going to tell you to track whatever you see. So it's going to give you a camera view, and you can make a box in that camera view. If you are standing in that box, it should then track you from that point. So the box should turn green, and then as you walk around, it should track you. So follow me actually follows your device. So if we go back in here and we look at this follow should follow your device. Track will track you based on the image of you in the camera, which could get a little interesting as you walk through or around obstacles, through tree lines, things like that. It may lose you on that. So that's just something to keep in mind there. The one thing that I really like about Litchi, and I wanted to show you folks before we jump into the Q&A here, is the ability to use their online mission hub. All right, so let me just share. Here's our Zoom meeting. So we've got Lychee Mission Hub right here. Flight planning from a little computer or a little cell phone screen, specifically as we go into the individual waypoints and we try and make adjustments, especially if they're getting close to each other. You know, sometimes I'll go and I'll click on the one when I'm on my cell phone, much smaller screen, and I'll accidentally click just to the side and it will just add another waypoint rather than going to the settings of this one here. So you can see it right there. It was kind of a bigger stretch on the computer screen, but on a small cell phone screen, I accidentally do it all the time. I try and hit one, it adds another point, you know, I may get a little frustrated. So the computer screen makes it really, really easy. So I can go through here. I get all my same settings that I had before. It's easy to see. There's none of the little scrolling, and I can do it all right here, which is really, really nice. And as soon as I get done with the mission that I want to fly here, all I got to do is go to missions here and hit save, and it'll save it. And I can then pull it up on my cell phone just by closing it, Litchi, open it back up again, and of course, making sure that I find the correct name that I added in here. So, you know, you save it, log into your account, and it should just automatically sync to your mobile phone or tablet, whatever it is that you're using. And that's just super helpful. Another cool thing that you can do, and I'm just going to throw it out there just because I really enjoy it, is you can actually go through and you can use Google Earth to plan some missions. And here's one of the reasons, if you folks haven't heard of drone light painting, it's actually just, I think it's really cool, but I'm kind of nerdy like that. But so we got Batman here. Now I'll let you know now, I didn't make this one, somebody else did. And we'll see that in a second because it's going to bring us over to England. But so I'm going to open this up here and it's going to bring us over to where it's at. So to me and you, this does not look like Batman in any way, shape, or form. Okay. But if we zoom in there just a little bit, we can see these different numbers. These here in black and white are our altitudes for each waypoint. All right. So we can actually use Google Earth. And let me go ahead and stop this share quick. So we can see Batman right here. Let me stop the share quick and I'll pull up Google Earth in the share. And you'll actually see what it is there. Here we go. Here's that same mission in Google Earth. And so we can kind of zoom down a little bit. And if we change our view, we can see that the aircraft is actually going to follow this pattern here. And so if you've got a bright enough light and you've got a camera sitting on the ground that has a bulb mode, you can actually, you know, hold the camera shutter open as the aircraft flies this path. And then of course you've got this nice painting of this case, the bat signal in the sky. So that's just something that really amuses me, something that I like doing. There's some really great groups on Facebook around drone light painting. So if you are a creative type, then I absolutely implore you to go out and take a look at this kind of stuff. Like I said, it's a good time. But at that point, I'm going to try and stop talking just a little bit here, and I'm going to jump into the chat and the Q&As. I see Diana had to leave. Diana's our great FAA representative with CTI there. She's awesome. If you ever have any questions about CTI, she is definitely the person to go to. Does Litchi have a terrain follow option? So in the mission hub, let me get back to it here. In the mission hub, when you select a waypoint, there is an option to use above ground. Okay, so if you select that above ground, you can do terrain following on it, but you're relying on that old data, and we don't know, you know, I don't know how it is off the top of my head for this specific data from Google Maps here. So, you know, it really depends on the type of operation, but yes, you can do it. again, depending on if there's been a lot of construction in the area, if you're in a suburban or urban environment that has had a lot of construction, maybe that's something you want to go out and scout the site before using that. Out here, we're really rural, so as long as we're not in a tree line or something like that, or there's not a new tree line, which is pretty rare, using above ground really isn't a problem. So just keep that in mind as you're planning your mission. So it is always best, even though we can plan here and with Pix4D without actually being on site, it is always best to get on site and evaluate your site and make sure that that things match up as far as for what you saw on the digital map here. So always a great idea. So at this point, is there any more questions, comments, any things we can answer for you? Not seeing anything at the chat at this moment. All right, so I'll give you another minute there while I talk just a little bit. So folks should get a survey at the end of this. We are working with the National Science Foundation under their Advanced Technological Education. We are a center of excellence there, and they like to be able to have hard data. So we will send you out a survey, or you should get a survey, I believe, as the webinar ends. And if you can take just a second, it's a one-question survey. Just lets us know that, hey, this was terrible, or we really learned something from it. So please answer honestly, and we'd love your feedback. For those of you who may be within the CTI community, please look for a survey coming out through. We're probably going to send it through the folks at CTI at the FAA about Mentor Connect and funding sources around NSF. NSF is really looking for more projects to be able to get behind. And so we're going to put together a little session about that. But we want some information from you folks about when it's going to work best and what exactly you'd like to see there. So if you are a member of the CTI community, the Collegiate Training Initiative for UAS, please keep an eye on your mailbox for information from that. And that should be going out later on this week here. So with that, I'm not seeing any other Q&A questions, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. And none of my folks in the background have told me there's something over for Facebook. So I think we're going to call it there. As always, thank you very much for spending your afternoon with me. I'm Zach Nicklin from the National Center for Autonomous Technologies, and this is part of our Think Autonomous series along with our CTI series. So please follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, National Center for Autonomous Technologies, and keep up to date on all the upcoming webinars and events we got going on. So thank you all, and have yourselves a great day.